HR and recruiters. What is an instant? Well, this person isn't getting the job. Thing a candidate can do during a job interview for you. This guy's resume had a ton of IT skills and technologies in it, and that should have been a red flag, but we didn't have many candidates for the position, so we gave him a chance. First question I asked him was, "So, I see you have PHP on your resume. Can you tell me what types of environments you've worked in?" His answer was, "What? I don't know that." And he didn't say it like he didn't know PHP, he said it like he'd never heard of it. When I showed him a copy of his resume, he scratched out PHP with a pen and said, "My friend did my resume for me. I'll have to update that." That was the end of any consideration of hiring him. I texted the recruiter to come get him, and it took them 20 minutes to get there. To be polite, we continued the interview, but it was a long 20 minutes. I don't remember everything, but every question was a train wreck. He insisted he knew Active Directory because he kept it on a USB drive he carried with him. He got a text and stared at his phone for about 10 very uncomfortable seconds and then said, "Hold on, this guy is trying to sell me some Windows," while he texted back. When asked what types of teams and groups he's used to working with, instead of saying very structured or easygoing, he rattled off about 10 names, first names, as if we knew who they were. When we asked what that team was like, he was like, "Oh, and then repeated the names again. Someone asked him to walk them through a typical day at his current job. I don't think he said anything about work and instead talked about his wife and his kids. Then he told us a story about a funny thing his uncle did years ago. I asked him how his work was presented to him and whether he used a ticketing system or if he used any project management software, and he said, "They call me." When I asked if he meant a help desk environment, he said, "No, they call me at home." He couldn't elaborate on how any of that worked or what he did after they called him. He jokingly insinuated that the real reason he was trying to get this job is because he wasn't making enough money in real estate and his wife wouldn't have intimacy with him. Because a lot of people are asking about why I had to call the recruiter to come get the guy, we're a fairly old school, literally organization, and our interview and recruiting process is overcomplicated. Candidates apply, they meet with HR, then they interview with my team. Sometimes they interview with other teams before or after my team, and then they meet with HR again, who escorts them out. This interview was several years ago. Now that the lockdown has almost completely ruled out face-to-face interviews, it's all done over Zoom and we can just end interviews whenever we want. And I'm pretty sure his wife is now regretting that no intimacy comment. Story 2. I was a manager hiring for a risk analyst position. We were working through a staffing agency and I was down to 3 I liked. However, there was one candidate I liked more than the others. Let's call her Alice. She sincerely wanted the position, and I believe she had the potential to be a great analyst. She even brought in examples of models she made in Excel and walked me through the framework. I wanted her to get the job. The only issue I saw was that she was a little high energy and a bit eccentric. She was probably somewhere on the spectrum. That was totally fine with me. Those could be positive characteristics with the right mentoring. My boss would be the final decision, but he hadn't been a part of the first rounds as I was doing most of the removal. The final 3 candidates I put in front of him should be good enough to make it to an offer. Otherwise, I'm wasting his time, and that makes me look bad. I wanted the girl to have an opportunity to put her best foot forward, so I asked her to a work lunch. I walked her through the position in a lot more detail. We spoke about the company culture. I gave her ideas as to what my boss might be looking for. I coached her on how to answer questions to come across as more professional. Overall, I just wanted her to be calm and collected. Day of second rounds, and there's Alice, me, my boss, and my boss's boss, who I was not expecting to be in the same room. I don't like doing interviews like this, where it's 3 senior employees interviewing the one candidate. From their perspective, I'm sure it makes you feel like you're being ganged up on and can make some people nervous. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Me, first question. "Alice, can you tell me about yourself? Give me a quick recap, professionally speaking, and then let us know what you do for fun outside the office." Alice: "I'm currently a financial analyst at XXX. I've been in that role for 4 years and I'm looking to grow, blah, blah, blah. And I guess outside the office, I like playing with Pokemon. I'm in love with Pokemon. I have all the stuffed toys. I have all the games. I collect the cards. Squirtle is my favorite." That's just not a good answer for the room. My boss is in his late 40s and my boss's boss is in his early 60s. I look over at my boss's notes. He scratched her name off. My boss's boss has now checked out of the conversation. I tried my best to get her back on track, but she knew she screwed up. She was nervous from that point on and was rambling. Boss started hinting at wrapping up the interview quickly. She was in and out in like 15 to 20 minutes. I walked into my boss's office after the interview and he just stared at me like, "What in the hell? Why would you carry her to the final round?" She didn't get the job. I guess sometimes the best laid out plans get completely derailed by a love for Squirtle. It is Squirtle. Story 3. Ooh, one of these I can actually participate in. So, we were looking for an intern in our tech department, someone to do very basic things like repair Chromebooks, update inventory, etc. We found a kid with a 4-year CS degree, and while he was way overqualified, he also had zero remotely relevant work experience. We interview, clearly explain the position, and offer it to him. A day before he is supposed to start, he calls my boss to say he has received another better sounding offer that he would like to take. No problem, we were actually happy for him, thinking the job was a better fit. 2 days later, we get a call asking if the position is still open because the job he got wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Boss agrees to hear him out but wants a frank discussion as to what his plans are. The important part, while discussing his plans, my boss uses a hypothetical of, "We just want to know you're still around till X time. I don't want you taking a position at boss's previous workplace," as a simple example, if they post an opening in 3 weeks. So, what does the kid do? He goes home and calls the place in the hypothetical scenario of what not to do. He calls and asks if they have a position that's opening up soon. The boss there calls mine and asks why he has people calling about a position he doesn't even have. Story 4. Had a guy literally sprint out of the building. I wasn't the interviewer. I am a web developer, but as we were trying to hire a second developer, I was asked to prepare some basic web development questions. These were not hard. These were absolutely bare basics, baby's first code stuff. So this guy comes in, starts interviewing, and was apparently doing okay. Not fantastic, but enough to keep him in consideration. Then he saw that we had a test, and he apparently grabbed his bag and ran out of the room. All I saw was this guy sprint full tilt past the rest of the office, shoulder barge out the door, and run off into the distance, followed by our 2 directors stumbling out of the interview office laughing uncontrollably. I guess he lied on his CV? Story 5. For a while, I did secondary interviews to help out a new store. They do the recruiting for candidates and pass on to me the ones they like best. I'd get some okay results, but one supervisor had no idea how to shut down a candidate that wasn't suitable. I coached her over and over, but she had too soft of a heart. I missed when I had one, pre-retail. This meant I got all kinds of characters. The worst, a candidate who laughed at me. He didn't have an answer for my first 2 questions, then just laughed at my third and shook his head. I shut down the interview and made it clear it was due to an inability to complete it. I politely asked if he had any questions, and he said, "Is the job paid by direct deposit or a check? Do you need a void check from me?" "No, sir, you're never getting a paycheck from us, ever." Story 6. I was interviewing someone who had previously worked at the American Embassy in his home country. The language barrier was very difficult, and he was having a tough time with the interview. Partway through, he showed me some certificates he received from the embassy job as awards for good work. The conversation then went like this. Me, "Can you tell me the story about some of these awards?" Him, "Huh?" Me, "I'd like to know why you received these awards. Maybe you can pick one of them and tell me the story about how you got it." Him, "Awards?" Me, "Yes, these things you're showing me right now. Tell me about them." Him, "They are awards." Me, "Right, tell me how you received them." Him, "How?" Me, "Yes, what did you do to get them?" Him, "I don't know, it's your embassy, you tell me." That last bit was the longest sentence he spoke to me during the entire interview. Story 7. Friend of a friend, call him Bob for short, got a job despite not being the best qualified candidate. Down to the final 2 for a teaching job, there was Bob, who was a solid, unremarkable candidate. Clearly good enough for the role, but nothing special about him as a candidate. And then there was Charlie. Charlie was an absolute rock star teacher, won awards, young, dynamic, and driven, outstanding teaching demo, just the nicest guy who had glowing references. Then they asked, "Any questions?" And he replied, "Could you tell me if you'd have a problem with a teacher dating a student?" Yes, they would. Bob got the job. Since lots of people have asked, this was a secondary school with 6th form in the UK, so ages 11 to 18. Story 8. I worked for a big, well-known company, and we were recruiting interns straight out of college. The questions are more of a get-to-know-you questions rather than actual knowledge of the work or experience. The company actually gave us a paper with some example questions, like the one below, that we could ask if we ran out of ideas. So it's going pretty well. Very bubbly, chatty girl, and I have the impression she would fit the team until me. How do you handle multiple deadlines in a short time period? For example, if you have 2 to 3 exams close to each other or an exam and a big class project. Interviewee, well, you try to do your best, but if I realize I cannot meet both deadlines, I just call in sick. Story 9. Was interviewing for a call center role in the healthcare industry, and the following all happened in the same assessment center. Lady would not stop talking about how her mom had cancer. I sympathized initially, but every answer would turn into, my mom had cancer and I dealt with cancer patients. Even technical questions about familiarity with systems would somehow lead back to her mom. No doubt she was qualified for the role, but when you have to deal with individuals going into hospital, you cannot start harping on about your personal experiences. A guy kept going on about how he was great for the role and excited to work with us. And at the end of the session, he even left saying, I look forward to getting my acceptance call. Little did he realize a manager in the assessment center recognized him and told us his real story. He'd been hired with us as a temp agent before, but after a week of training, a 2-week course, called in sick for a week before quitting via text to the same manager who had the text on her phone and showed them to us, and saying he had emailed HR only to list an email that did not even belong to our company. I don't know how he thought he could say he had never worked for us and get away with it. Another guy who was so obnoxious and self-centered kept going on about how many businesses he had run, and during the one-on-one interview said, "Excuse my French," and then proceeded to drop the F-bomb, which makes one think he had a second to think about it and then decided to still swear during an interview. Story 10. Working as a recruiter, I always had several completely inexperienced guys applying for TL and senior positions despite having just graduated from some mediocre coding course and having nothing to show for it. They somehow always were a very specific brand of a person. However, the record on disqualified candidates belongs to an applicant for a junior motion designer position. They didn't attach a portfolio. I thought maybe they didn't get around to make one yet. It can happen, and I like giving people the benefit of the doubt. I figured I could just give them a home task if needed. I asked them the standard questions about how experienced they were with standard industry software, After Effects, Blender, and a couple of others. I can use Word. Does it help? This applicant clearly has a very unique definition of motion design. It involves a lot of bolding and italics, I'm sure, for him. Story 11. This was me actually giving the job interview, so I was the one hiring. We had to dramatically underpay these salespeople, so our choices were horrible, but none were worse than this one creepy guy. He was basically a serial criminal. He walked in the conference room and right away I knew he was sketchy. I should have ended the interview right when I saw him. Ill-fitting suit, slick back hair, looked shady as hell. I didn't want to judge a book by the cover though, so I gave him a chance. I asked the first couple questions, tell me about yourself, that kind of crap. Here was when I asked him to leave. I said, so tell me why you want to work in sales. He goes, well, I'm new in town, so I think this will be a great way to get to meet people, especially women. And when he said, especially women, he winked at me. Ew, just right now typing this gave me the creeps and made me shiver all over. Ugh. Story 12. Not an interviewer, but the one being interviewed. I was at the second interview for a shipping company that specialized in shipping delicate, expensive, rare goods privately. Pay was great, benefits were great, just a good job for a 19-year-old me to have in every way. I'd previously impressed the 2 interviews after a written test where we were told to write an email to a customer about some issue that had arisen with their shipment. We were given a list of issues to choose from since it was just a test. Anyways, it had been narrowed down to 2 candidates. All I had to do was pass the second interview, which was mostly informal chatting, let them learn more about me, hobbies, past jobs, things like that. They asked why I didn't pursue any languages during my BTEC/A levels at high school in the UK. I told them I hated German and French and just had no interest whatsoever. I said this to the 2 brothers, the ones interviewing me, who own this private shipping company, a company that often deals with customers who don't always speak English. They politely told me that knowing a bit of some languages tends to go a long way with their customers. As expected, I didn't get the job. It was a good learning experience, though, that sometimes there is such a thing as too much honesty. Story 13. Condescending to or insulting any interviewer. It seems like such an easy thing not to do, but actually a significant portion of the developers we turn down at the interview stage get turned away for that reason. We're a small company doing contract software development. We jump from project to project and often have to understand many technologies together to work on a small team. The chances are extremely high that every developer will end up working on something they don't understand but someone else does, and if they can't go to others for help, they won't succeed in this position. But so often, we'll get people who will talk over female devs or say things like, you wouldn't understand, or it's highly technical, in response to their questions. Or they'll get into an interview with a C++ developer and say, thank God, I thought I was going to spend all day talking to front-end guys and have to come back another day to talk to an actual developer. Why would you insult someone interviewing you for a job? It's like, if this is what this person acts like when they're trying to impress, can you imagine what those people would be like to their teammates on a stressful deadline or something? Story 14. Late to the party, but here goes. not a recruiter or an HR, but as part of my training to possibly move up in the company I work at, I sat in on a few interviews to observe recently. I work in the health and social care sector, and one of the questions that is asked in the interview is, how do you make sure that you leave your work at work and not take it home with you? One of the candidates said something along the lines of, I work until the work is done, and if that means taking it home, then so be it. After the interview, the service manager and my manager conferred and said that this answer was the main reason this person would not be getting the job. I asked why, and they told me there were a few reasons this is a bad answer. First, burnout in health and social care is a huge problem, and they don't want to take someone on if they're going to work themselves into the ground. Second, if someone works late as a public sector employer, government funded, they are legally required to give time back for extra hours spent working. Overtime pay isn't such a thing here. And they can't be granting time off in lieu all over the place because core hours wouldn't be covered. Third, it shows someone unwilling to ask for help or to delegate. And this role in particular is all about collaborative working, and this person seemed to be a bit of a lone wolf, insistent on forging on alone, which is not the attitude they're looking for. Story 15. I'm a recruiter in a tech company. We mainly hired experienced algorithm and software developers, so generally you tend to expect people who know how to interview. Nope. I look racially ambiguous. I've been asked by a candidate for a team leadership role if I was Indian the first 2 seconds of the interview. He actually got the job and works for the company today, a year and a half later. Another candidate spent 30 minutes complaining about his current workplace and how terrible it is while I desperately try to cut him off and get him to answer my damn question. I was hit on during an interview by a candidate twice my age. Yep. I had a candidate for a testing position whom I headhunted on LinkedIn, and he agreed to talk and hear about the position. During the phone call, he said something along the lines of, I'm headhunted all over. I need to hire an assistant because the phone won't stop ringing, in a very arrogant tone. He was very annoying and full of himself during the entire conversation. He did not progress to a F2F interview, but every time we open a similar position, he applies. Story 16. I have one that I did. I worked at an outdoorsy attraction like a national park in a different department from the one the interview was for. I would be keeping my current casual job helping guests day to day, but also wanted to be a guide, which was way more interesting and paid better. I had a lot of experience in teaching and performance stuff and great relationships with all the park staff on my teams and would have been great at the job. In the group interviews, I was streets ahead of most and got on really well with the recruiters in my one-on-one interview. So how did I screw it up? All the other candidates turned up in their park uniforms, neat and ironed, but the uniforms they wore in their other departments, which was the same as the guides wear. Now me, though, I had no idea that anyone would do that. Thought we had to dress up, like best, smartest clothes. We had to look professional for the interview. I wore a pinstripe suit. Guess who looked the most out of place? Guess who didn't look like part of the team, like at all? Guess who hasn't thought far enough ahead to realize the most professional attire might be the clothes you'd wear actually doing that profession? Worst bit then is I'm still working with the people they hired as the guides. One was from my department and a terrible employee. Learned a good lesson that day. Story 17. People who are mean to receptionists, frontline staff. When I used to do recruitment, I'd always ask the receptionist and security afterwards what the person was like. On more than one occasion, they'd tell me the person snapped at them, belittled them, or even yelled at them once. But they were on their best behavior with me. Needless to say, not only did they not get hired for that job, they were put on the do not hired list. Also, ask good questions about the role, company, team, etc. I was looking for someone on my team, so in HR, I hold my own people to a higher standard in interviews since we should know better. And the only questions the person had were, how often can I work from home? And how much vacation do I get? These are fine questions to ask along with others, but if that's the only thing you're going to ask, it doesn't seem like you're really interested in the job or working hard. And if you're learning a thing or two from these stories, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. I was interviewing someone for a coordinator role with my colleague. I outranked my colleague, and the interview candidate got our names and positions prior to the interview and was briefed by HR. During the interview, the candidate proceeded to answer my questions with curt and condescending responses while trying to bro out with my colleague trying to make small talk. He then tried to mansplain social media based on his experience as an intern while knowing my background is in digital marketing. Worst part was, for most of the interview, he wasn't making eye contact with me. Needless to say, I vetoed him as a candidate and told my boss not to waste her time. She was in the interview slot after me and talked to him for 5 minutes to be polite before ending the interview for an emergency. He has since applied to other roles within my company and didn't make it past the screener. Story 19. Had to fill a junior networking position in the DC metro area. Candidates had to be US citizens, but the pay was on the extreme low end for the skills we were looking for. Additionally, my boss wouldn't let me work with the HR rep directly and wasn't passing the list of requirements I wrote to the HR rep, so I got a lot of bad resumes. So I finally got a resume that looks like someone has done networking before. He has a bunch of small/branch office routers and switches listed on his resume. My boss does a phone screen and has a guy come in. Me, tell me about a difficult problem you solved. Guy, I don't know. Me, okay, tell me how to create and apply an access list on this router model you have listed on your resume. Guy, I don't know. Me, okay, can you tell me any command you can run on any of the devices listed on your resume? Guy, no. I thanked him for coming in and told him someone would be in touch. No idea how he thought that interview would go. So I guess my example is not being able to talk about anything on the resume they provide. Story 20. Years ago, I was tasked with opening a new branch in another state. We needed to hire many people in a relatively short time. I spent my days interviewing 8 to 10 people a day in a tiny makeshift office while the building was under construction. One person will be forever burned into my memory. She came in professionally dressed, and the conversation started off great. As we gradually went through the interview questions, things got weird fast. She started to tie her horoscope sign into multiple answers. She'd say, "That's just the Scorpio in me," and "I'm a Scorpio, so that's why I do it this way." Then she proceeded to get louder and angrier with each question. Simple questions like, "How many years' experience do you have in X?" would leave her basically shouting and glaring. The most unnerving thing was how her eyes seemed to change from the original handshake to sitting down and answering questions. She would stare at me in an unsettling, wide-eyed way that was confrontational and aggressive. She went from seemingly upbeat and happy to be there to me feeling like she was going to attack at any moment. I wrapped it up and walked her out, making sure she left the building. And as she was leaving, she turned around with a huge smile and said sweetly, "I hope to hear back from you soon." What? I've interviewed thousands of people since then. She remains the most disturbing one ever. Story 21. I'm not HR, but I hired my mat leave replacement. 2 candidates stand out to me. The job was marketing, social media management, event planning, and graphic design all in one. It's a tough combo of skills to find, surprisingly. First candidate was a contractor for social media planning for a bunch of our competitors. I asked how she would avoid conflict of interest, and she looked at me like I was insane. So, nope, not hiring someone who is actively working for our competitors and think it's fine. Second candidate was strong in design, had no experience in marketing or events. He was finishing up at school. I wanted to try and at least interview students and recent graduates because I remember how hard it was to get that first job. I asked how he would compensate for no experience in this skill area, and he replied, "Well, I learn quickly, so I'll succeed if I'm taught properly," and stared me down. No thanks, buddy. I'm not being blamed by you for your lack of skills or initiative to learn. Story 22. An amazing recruiter I know got me an interview at a brilliant company. While we were grabbing a drink to talk about the role, he said, "It goes without saying, but dress well." I asked him if there's a reason he says that. He was recruiting for a tech company that had a pretty stellar reputation and found a candidate with terrific skills and glowing references. We'll call him Fred. Now, this recruiter always asks both a company and candidate to call him once the interview is over to see how things went. The company calls him back way earlier than expected to tell him that Fred turned up in shorts and a black shirt that said "Screw Java." Fred wasn't hired, and the recruiter had to apologize profusely to that company, but they cut ties with him. Shame, he's a great guy who is good at his job. Story 23. Hygiene. It was for a designer role in a high-tech company. My manager interviewed him first before coming back to my desk rather soon. I said, "Wow, that was quick." He replied, "He's all yours." I opened the door to the interview room and almost fell over backwards. Whatever place this guy came from, water was scarce. For me, I had spent part of my youth shoveling horse manure on the family farm, so I had techniques to breathe while in harsh environments. So I talked to him and attempted to determine if he had any special skills that we needed. He had nothing really remarkable to offer, though. Story 24. I was interviewing for a job way above my pay grade, but as it was a competency-based interview, I was capable of conducting the interviews. Most candidates were mid-level managers. In response to a question about using information to make a decision, one candidate gave the following response. Several employees came with a complaint about cruel behavior from a colleague within earshot of customers. I told them I didn't like tattletale, so they came back with a union rep and CCTV footage. Disciplinaries take a lot of paperwork, so I just called everyone into my office and told them I don't expect them to be ratting on each other. When prompted as to what information was available for his decision, he clarified they had CCTV footage. If I watched it, I'd be accountable since I'd actually know what happened, so I wiped the tapes. Story 25. Worked as a telephone interviewer. I've had plenty of people think the telephone interview is just a formality. It's not. The interviewer decides on who goes through. Had one candidate who was a bit cocky and full of herself. She gave fairly good but not amazing answers. Lost a few marks on communication, but was still looking to pass. But at the end, she started to make comments about how she didn't want to end working in a call center position like me, and that she knew she was going to pass, so I can just let her know when the next stage is. Her tone was so arrogant, I had enough reason to fail her communication. I politely reminded her that actually I am the one marking the interview and that we'll be in touch once I've marked the interview. She tried to complain, but after my managers listened back, as they are obliged to do, they couldn't fault me at all. Story 26. I've been recruiting for around 10 years. Flirting and hitting on me is a straight no. You could be the best candidate in town, but if you can't keep it professional, it is a no. This happens mostly during phone interviews, aka they don't even know what I look like. If you are rude to the receptionist or send an angry email after the interview, also a no. I swear I'm a really nice HR recruiter and I get a lot of feedback from candidates saying it was the best and most humane interview they get, and I always do follow up positive or negative after an interview. But man, there are some horrible entitled people out there. The world is small and our industry is smaller than you think. We might cross paths again, and trust me, every HR person has some blacklisted candidate. Also, don't lie. I understand you might not have the experience for the role, but do not apply to a senior account manager position when you are fresh out of school. I can do the math from your graduation date and past experience. I could write a book about the best and worst interviews I had. Ha ha ha. Story 27. One of the big no-nos is saying a problem was impossible to solve. Any answer is better than that, even if you have to say you're still working on it despite trying numerous avenues, which you should specify. It can show resourcefulness, delegation, and ability to learn as opposed to giving up and dumping a problem. Another is simply to make up an answer. If you don't know, say you don't know or ask, can you come back to that? Don't waste the time of people interviewing you. They've possibly spent their whole month searching for the right candidate, sifting through 200 applicants, interviewing 50 of them, and the last thing they want is someone wasting their time. Also, don't say something which could be interpreted as contentious unless you can back it up. I once hired a scrum master who said they didn't like Kanban. When challenged as to why they didn't, they couldn't answer with anything meaningful or justify their position. They made a stupid statement rather than admit they didn't actually understand what is a relatively simple concept and one commonly used in areas they wanted to work in. Story 28. Well, you sort of develop a feeling for the different candidates based on several different factors, like are they dressed for the job, have they bothered with taking a shower and brushing their teeth, etc., etc. What they know about the job, meaning did they want this job or did they just want a job? How do they talk and act? Are they acting a role or are they trying to show you who they really are? Other things are, of course, qualifications and other things necessary for the job. So some of the things that have happened over the years that have made me almost instantly think, well, she isn't getting the job. He came in and lit a cigarette, and when I said, you can't smoke in here, he said, you can't make me. Complaining about everything is something else. We always offer coffee to all the candidates. Instead of saying thank you, he said, office coffee is so disgusting. How can you drink this crap? Then he went on to complain about the chairs. They were not soft enough or were not sturdy enough. Complaining about other jobs they have had before. Being entitled, holy crap, I can't stand these people. Coming into an interview demanding stuff, that isn't going to work. Putting up their shoes on the table, yes, this has happened. Coming into the interview intoxicated, this has also happened. I mean, I'm a pretty libertarian guy, but there are limits, you know? Story 29. 10 years in HR, just in general, applying to a job you are not qualified for. Believe me, I understand how frustrating it is to be stuck in a job you don't like or even be out of a job ETM. But applying for hundreds of jobs you really can't do is not a great way to go about fixing it. Had a coworker that applied to product design, programming, logistics, engineering, and material planning in the company we worked at. Frustrated as heck, he didn't get any of the positions. I was the HR manager in a couple of positions where he got far enough to get an interview. The guy was a CPA, no experience in coding, in engineering, in manufacturing, or whatever. Painful experience seeing him go through those interviews and seeing his self-esteem slowly wither away. He ended up getting fired for lying on an interview about his contributions to an IT project. The guy interviewing was a program manager for the project. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of early career, fresh out of college jobs you can apply to regardless of your major and you can excel at. Just don't apply to something you have no idea how to do and the position clearly states the required knowledge. I don't think it's healthy even for your own health. Don't oversell yourself too. Humble confidence, let your experience and work speak for you. Story 30. I had a guy tell me how he got fired for stealing but claimed he was marketing by giving products to pretty girls. Another explained he was fired for punching a guy at work and breaking his nose. Said next time he would go for a punch to the stomach, less to see. Another looked around my office and asked if he would be bigger and he would need to order specific furniture because he can't work on old, dirty stuff. The job was a maintenance clerk. I had a mom sit outside the office while I interviewed the 19-year-old son. After she comes in and says he needs his name to remind him to take his ADD meds daily, and we should have someone remind him to pay attention, he interviews for an inspecting job. I have dozens more, also ones I thought would be busts based on first impressions but were rock stars. One guy came in for a manager job and was in dirty, torn jeans and a shirt. He explained his dad had a heart attack 2 days before and he needed to harvest dad's crops, so he came straight from the field to the interview. Dude was a great employee and was promoted. Story 31. I was interviewing candidates for an administrative role in a fast-paced logistics office. One of my usual questions was, what will be your next steps if you don't get this position? I was looking for comments around self-analysis of skills, maybe have someone to do mock interviews with me, etc. I asked this question to a female candidate who was probably borderline at best, who said, I'd like to start a club, where couples and singles could have a nice meal and then have intimacy with whoever they wanted. The account manager was sitting with me and his jaw hit the table and his face was beet red. I politely thanked her and wished her success in her future endeavors. The other manager couldn't understand how I kept a straight face and continued the interview. I told him that at this point in my career, not too much of what candidates say surprises me anymore. Story 32. One guy argued with me over what my ad said. He insisted he applied for a multi-unit manager position. I pulled up the ad and read him what it said, single unit manager, and I even included the address. No, you're wrong. I tried to move on and thanked him for his time. There was clearly a misunderstanding somewhere as I only had a single unit job. He, again, tried to tell me the mistake was on my part, but he was willing to consider a job offer as long as the path to a regional or district manager would be an option within 6 months. I almost forgot about the person applying for a corporate position. They applied online but then came to my office a day or two later. She wanted to drop off a copy since she was the absolute best for the position, her words, and I was taking too long to hire her. She then tried to push past me to see where her desk would be. Story 33. I was covering the kitchen manager a few years back while he was on a trip. He'd left me with 4 people to interview for a job as a line chef. Easy enough job, and I'd sat in on a lot of other interviews myself. Generally, you go for people who seem honest and reliable no matter what their skill level is. 9 times out of 10, if someone looks like they're willing to work 70 hours a week to pay the bills and still have time to drink afterwards, they're hired. Anyway, one of the candidates was a dud the KM put in there just to screw with me. Imagine a hobo, scraggly beard, stank of crap. During the tour of the kitchen, I ask him what his skills are, proceed to walk on the line and pick up the biggest utensil, then look me in the eyes and say, I'm real good with knives, while waving it back and forth. KM was remote watching the cameras from his hotel room, laughing it up. Story 34. I was the one being interviewed for this. Applied to be a cook at 2 restaurants, and the first interview was awful. The guy who interviewed me looked at my resume and insisted that Brunoise was a typo and said, already not going well. Asked what culinary school I went to. I told him I didn't, but grew up with my father being a restaurateur and had worked in one of the highest rated, highest volume restaurants in downtown Portland. No formal training. Got it, the guy says. He actually ended the interview by telling me he hoped I got the next job, but to call him if I didn't and that maybe they could make me a server. I got a second job. I make more money than the guy that interviewed me now, and my head chef was able to see that I was absolutely worth his time. Advice to cooks: your skill is not determined by a degree from a diploma mill culinary school. Somebody will see your abilities if you stick with it. It's an egotistical industry, and you have to play the game to a certain extent without becoming one of those angry cooks. Story 35. I was hiring for an IT job and asked why a candidate had left his previous job, which is a pretty normal question that usually gets a very normal answer. But then he said he had quit in protest when the company refused his request to buy a software vendor. He explained that they had been buying software from this vendor for years and had heavily customized it to their needs. But then the vendor updated the software in a way that broke those customizations and dropped support for the old version. He was the person responsible for maintaining those customizations, and when he learned he would have to spend time redoing them, He instead insisted that the company buy the vendor and force them to fix the problem themselves or roll back to the older version. The company said no, obviously, so he was quiet on the spot. He also bragged that he had not documented any of his customizations before leaving. I cannot fathom why this guy thought this would make him look good. Story 36. I don't interview often, it's not something I'm good at, but sometimes I get asked to interview a programmer to ensure they know what they're talking about. I tend to do this for less tech-savvy clients, and I want to make sure my client is getting someone they can work with. So I do a simple task, ask a stupid question, and see how they handle it. Getting angry at me for being stupid is an instant nope. From one position I was interviewing people for, me. So you said you've done a lot of Node.js. How come it's not listed under your known programming languages in your resume? Best answer? Oh, it's actually a framework, but that's a good point. I should really have a section for frameworks I'm familiar with. Good answer. That's because Node.js is just a framework, not a language itself. The language is JavaScript. Bad answer. You're the senior developer and you don't know what Node.js is? Story 37. HR manager of 10 years here, and there is one interview that really stands out and we'll probably never forget. I used to work as an HR advisor for a biscuit factory. We operated largely on seasonal and temporary workers and would sometimes need up to 100 per year. All were directly hired by the company, so needed interviewing. We ran recruitment days where my task was to interview them whilst others in the candidate group were doing different tasks. We pretty much just needed a pair of hands, so the standards were pretty slack. I was pretty much just screening for psychopaths, which was fine until I met one. I got to his CV in the pile. Pro tip, look at the damn CVs first. Noticed he had a 32-year gap and asked him about it. He said, was inside, not a snappy snapper though, not like one of those Tory nonces. Why I didn't end it there, I'm not sure. I asked him if he minded sharing what he was in prison for. His conviction was spent, so he had no obligation to. He then described in detail how he hurt his boyfriend because at the time he would have lost his job in the army if he was not straight. He also asked in the interview if there were many women that worked there. The packing floor was predominantly women, as he could not stand working for women. In hindsight, I learned a lot about recruitment processes as it could have cost me my life. Well, if you like these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.